Okay, we are live. What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and I'm coming to you live with a commentary on the new Warrior cards from the Classic Battles Rhinar versus Dorinthea set. So we have the full art of that set up on stream here, and I'm going to be going through. I'm actually going to be going through and just looking at these different cards that were released for the Warrior class. And some of them are actually generics, but they're oriented towards warrior play. And I'm going to be talking about them and whether or not I think they have a place in competitive play, and whether or not I think they're going to be strong cards for the future of the game. So yeah, we're going to be getting right to it. Let's get into the card reviews. And I also have some things queued up that are going to allow me to show some existing cards and how they can play a similar role. So if you picked up that Classic Battle set and you're interested in how to maybe upgrade the Dorinthea deck with some cards that can help it play a similar game plan more effectively, there's also going to be some stuff here for you. All right, so let's move on and see the first thing here. So I should also say there isn't, as far as I know, a real gallery here. So these are actually, I'm pulling these up actually on TCG Player. So these are hosted on TCG Player, and you can also see the prices for the cards, which will be relevant, I think, in some cases. But yeah, hopefully LSS is going to put up an official card gallery for this set sometime soon, because there are some new cards that are only in this set and not in other boosters. So first up, we're looking at Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy. This is the new version of Dorinthea, and this is actually, I think, a really smart thing for LSS to do. So this hero has a much simplified version of Dorinthea's hero ability. The first time Dawnblade Resplendent gains Go Again each turn, you may attack an additional time with it this turn. Now, let's do a little compare and contrast. This is the old Young Dorinthea, I believe, should be showing up on screen. Yep, there we go. So Young Dorinthea, the older version, has this ability where as a once per turn effect, when a weapon attack hits, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. Now, this ability is actually really confusing to new players. It's caused a lot, I think, of confusion or difficulty, because the thing about this is that it does allow you to attack an additional time, but it does not give you Go Again. And because of that, I know when I was new, I would mess this up sometimes, where you think like, oh, I can attack again, but you have to also have a Go Again effect to do that. Or you would have the reverse situation where you have the Go Again effect and you're like, oh, I'll just swing again, but you can't because it's a once per turn attack. And so old Dorinthea, you have to combine both the Go Again and the ability that will allow you to get your weapon to attack an additional time. The most normal way to do this would be to use a card like Warrior's Valor that is going to potentially give your attack Go Again and then hit with it, which will allow you to get Dorinthea's ability to then swing again. This Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy, though, from the new set, is going to be a lot more straightforward in that it's just when you get Go Again, you can attack an additional time. There's no on hit. There's nothing like that. All you have to do is play a card that's going to give the Dawnblade Resplendent Go Again, and you can immediately attack an additional time regardless of whether or not it hits. Now, whether or not that's going to be this is going to be a competitively strong hero, we'll have to see. I currently think that normal Dorinthea is going to be stronger, but there is a little something that gives me some hope for the Quicksilver Prodigy, which we will get to in a moment. All right, so that is Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy and old Dorinthea. Incidentally, this card is selling for about $10 right now, although it's very early on in the secondary market for this set, and it does have cool art, and it is, I believe, actually a cold foil as well. So, pretty cool thing, there. We're then going to go to the new weapon. This is Dawnblade Resplendent. So this is a new version of Dawnblade. Once per turn action, 1 resource attack. The second time you attack with it each turn, it gains +1 until end of turn. It is a two-handed weapon. The base strength is only 2 instead of 3. Now, let's compare this to the normal Dawnblade. So normal Dawnblade is once per turn action, 1 resource attack for 3 instead of 2. And if it hits you, and it's the second time that it's hit in a turn, you get a +1 counter. And at the beginning of your end phase, if you did not hit with Dawnblade this turn, you lose the +1 counter. So Dawnblade Resplendent is going to start off at strength 2, but if you get that second attack, it'll go up to strength 3, whereas the new Dawnblade, or the old Dawnblade rather, is going to be swinging at strength 3 regardless. And if you hit on the second attack, it's actually going to get a +1 counter that'll buff it up to strength 4 for future turns. So based on just these weapon cards, Dawnblade Resplendent is... I mean, I gotta be straightforward with you guys. Dawnblade Resplendent, based on these cards alone, is objectively worse than Dawnblade. There is actually an interaction that makes it so that Dawnblade Resplendent is not objectively worse, and there is a reason to consider playing it, and I'm going to get to that later. But if you're not doing anything fancy, if you're not doing anything cool or fancy, Dawnblade Resplendent is going to basically just be a worse version of Dawnblade. Now, I will also say Dawnblade Resplendent works with new Dorinthea's hero ability, so if you are playing that Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy, you want to be playing Dawnblade Resplendent. Her ability does not work on the original Dawnblade, which is good because that would be really, really strong. So, you know, we'll see whether Quicksilver Prodigy and Dawnblade Resplendent become a powerful deck. By default, Dawnblade Resplendent is a less powerful weapon than Dawnblade, but we are going to see something that may change that calculation a bit in the future of this review. All right, so let's get to the next item here. We're now going to look at On a Knife Edge. Bit of an odd one, quite frankly. On a Knife Edge, this is a attack. It is a generic action here that just gives your next sword attack this turn go again, and it costs 0 and blocks for 2. So I actually don't have the card image for this preloaded, but there is a warrior card very similar to this called Hit and Run, and Hit and Run is basically just an objectively better version of On a Knife Edge, quite frankly. And the reason that I say that is Hit and Run is the same effect, but it blocks for 3. And additionally, if you have already attacked with a weapon this turn, it gives your next attack plus X, where X is 1 for blue, 2 for yellow, 3 for red. So On a Knife Edge is basically a nerfed version of Hit and Run. It is a yellow pitch, which is kind of nice, but like if you consider that a Hit and Run blue is a blue pitch, it blocks for 1 more, and it can potentially be played with the stat buff being relevant. This card is really just not very good. Now you have to think, okay, so this is a generic, it's not a warrior card, so where are we going to be using this outside of warrior? You know, what are the other options that are going to potentially make this a good card? And the obvious option for that is Runeblade. So Runeblade characters also use swords, and the problem is that the way that Runeblade sword attacks work, you often want to have made an attack already, and sometimes they get a benefit from having made a non-attack. So I'm thinking in particular about Rosetta Thorn, which is going to deal 2 arcane damage if you've done an attack and a non-attack. Nebula Blade will get its strength bonus if you have done a non-attack. So you could see something like someone playing On a Knife Edge into a Nebula Blade swing to lead off their turn as Viserai or whatever. I don't think that's going to be very good relative to just using Rosetta Thorn, but you know, it is a thing you could do. Ultimately, I think it's relatively unlikely that On a Knife Edge is going to see very much play, at least in the current state of the game, because Warrior has cards already that do a similar thing but better. And Runeblade, I don't think really wants this type of effect, though I could be wrong. You know, maybe we're going to see people using, you know, maybe we're going to see Briar decks that are going to play, you know, some non-attack action, then come in with On a Knife Edge, then come in with the Rosetta Thorn with Go Again. But the thing is, I think that Runeblades often have other ways to get Go Again, and sometimes they can do that while also getting other effects that are more powerful. And wanting to have your weapon in the middle of your turn is usually not that important, though maybe we would see some deck that tries to get a Rosetta swing in the middle of its combat chain in order to deal arcane damage to enable some other card. You know, maybe you're going to try to do some sort of combo where you're going to, like, I don't know, you play a Scar for a Scar, On a Knife Edge, Rosetta Swing, and then that's going to enable arcane damage for your Nourishing Emptiness follow-up or something. You know, that seems... that seems like a setup that is at least kind of good, though I'm not sure that that's going to be something that's consistent or relevant enough for you to want to put On a Knife Edge into your build. As a Runeblade player and as a Warrior player, you kind of have better options elsewhere. So not a card that I expect to see a ton of play. But, you know, for a starter card, it is nice and simple. You know, this is just, you're going to play it. It is going to give that, Dawnblade Resplendent go again, and then you're going to be able to make your 2 swings instead of 1. So, you know, that's pretty straightforward. All right, let's get to the next card here. This one is going to be Blade Flash. So this costs 1, and it is target sword attack gains go again as a generic attack reaction with 2 block. So again, unfortunately, this is an objectively bad card relative to other options that are available for the warrior class. So let's take a look at some of those. So here is a Glint the Quicksilver. So Glint the Quicksilver just outclasses this card immensely because Glint is actually the... so Glint, first off, Glint is target weapon attack, not target sword attack. Second off, Glint costs 0 instead of 1 and blocks 3 instead of 2. And then furthermore, Glint has this reprise effect where if the defending hero has defended with a card from their hand, this chain link, you draw a card. So Glint has the same effect, it costs less, it blocks more, and you have a bonus effect on top of it. There's no reason at all to ever play Blade Flash over Glint. Now, someone might say, okay, well, Glint is a majestic, and you can only play 3, and what if I want more copies of that effect? Well, the fact of the matter is, Glint isn't the only card Warrior has for this option. So we're going to now look at Blade Runner. So Blade Runner, this is a yellow Blade Runner. There is, of course, a blue Blade Runner as well. So this is going to cost 1 resource, and it is target one-hand weapon attack gains go again. Now, to be fair, one-handed weapon attack, you know, Dawnblade is two-handed, so you're not going to be able to, you would not be able to use Blade Runner on the Dawnblade. But target one-handed weapon attack gains go again, and your next weapon attack this turn gains +2. So if you are using a one-handed weapon, Blade Flash, this is the Blade Runner is doing the same thing as Blade Flash, and it's doing the same thing while also providing a stat buff for the next attack. And, you know, it also has the same benefit of blocking for 3 instead of 2. So Blade Flash is really doing the same kind of thing as Blade Runner, except worse. Now, you might play it, maybe you're playing a Dorinthea deck and you're like, I really, really want to have more attack reaction go again. I'm gonna play my 3 Glints, yeah, but I'm gonna put Blade Flashes in there too, just to keep my opponent guessing. I know it's a worse card, but it's a card that's doing something that I want to do. I'm not going to say that's totally invalid, but there is going to be another card later on in this preview that I think you would want to run over Blade Flash in that role. And I think if you're playing a Rune Blade, I don't think you really want to be playing Blade Flash. And the reason that I say that is, you know, the previous card that I was looking at there, the one that was the non-attack action, you know, Rune Blades do have some non-attack action synergies that make that more appealing, but I think that Blade Flash is Blade Flash as an attack reaction is not necessarily the type of thing that Runeblade most wants to be leaning into. You could play it, but I don't think it's going to see widespread play. I could be wrong. You know, let's see how things develop. But yeah, so Blade Flash. If you can play Blade Runner is the same thing but better. And if you can play Glint is the same thing but a lot better. So not an incredibly exciting card, but again, simple card for a newcomer. And this is kind of an intro product. Not everything in this product has to be, you know, the competitive standard. All right, let's take a look at the next one here. We are going to move on from Blade Flash, and we are going to take a look here at Thrust. This is a generic attack reaction. Target sword attack gains +3, costs 1 resource. Okay, so this one, so first off, again, this is objectively bad. But it's less objectively bad. Okay, so we're going to take a look at Razor Reflex. So this is a red Razor Reflex. It also costs 1 and blocks for 2 because both are neutral. It also gives a sword attack +3, but it works on dagger attacks as well. And you can also play it on a attack action card with cost 1 or less to give it the +3, and if this hits the attack gains go again. So Thrust, compared to Razor Reflex, Thrust is the same thing, except it's much more constrained. So Razor Reflex has that benefit that's also going to apply to attack action cards if you're running those Scar for Scars, or you know, maybe you're running some copies of Snatch or some other some other some other attack action card that you want to put into your game plan, Razor Reflex can work on that as well as on your weapon attacks. In the Crucible of War meta, I had a Dorinthea deck that incorporated a lot of generic attack action cards, and Razor Reflex was a really cool pick there because I could use it to buff my Dawnblade to try to get through and start building up those counters, but I could also use it with my smaller attacks to kind of sneak in some extra damage or potentially get a go again, and that ended up being pretty cool. So Razor Reflex, basically the same kind of concept as Thrust there, except better. Now I will say, in defense of the new card, target sword attack gains +3. There are some decks that are playing Razor Reflex where it will almost only ever be used for the +3. Like I've seen some warrior decks that are not running small attacks and are just running Razor Reflex to have another thing that's going to buff their Dawnblade or whatever. If you're doing that, Thrust is actually basically the same card, so there's not really any downside, and arguably Thrust's art looks cooler. So in that situation, maybe you are going to want to run it over the Razor Reflex. I guess if you were playing a deck that already had 3 red Razor Reflexes and you wanted even more attack reactions, you could play a Thrust on top of that. One other thing I'll say, though, is we're going to highlight one of the warrior attack actions, Stroke of Foresight. So first off, on the cool art spectrum, Stroke of Foresight's art is even better. But also the Stroke of Foresight is basically an example of the type of thing that you can get in the warrior class instead of as a generic. So like other warrior cards, it blocks for 3 instead of 2. Almost every warrior card blocks for 3. I think Courageous Steel Hand, which is a light warrior attack reaction, blocks for 2, and I believe every other warrior card that blocks for 3, with the exception of Steelblade Shunt, which is a defense reaction. But I believe all normal warrior cards other than Courageous Steel Hand block for 3. So Stroke of Foresight blocks for 3, and again, it costs 1 to give a weapon attack +3, and in addition, you do have that reprise effect coming in that is going to allow you to potentially do a little filtering. You're going to draw a card and then put a card from your hand on the top or bottom of your deck. So a little bit better than an opt. It's going to allow you to set up a cool situation. And so, if you are building a deck in the warrior class, cards like Stroke of Foresight Red, there's another one called Out for Blood Red that is also a 1 for 3 and has a relevant reprise effect. And those cards are probably going to make it into the deck before you'd want to play a copy of Thrust. So Thrust, again, not the strongest card in the world. Not total garbage or anything, but again, not a card that you would necessarily want to be using in constructed play. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next of the new warrior cards, Visit the Blacksmith. Again, actually a generic card, but it's in the warrior deck. Visit the Blacksmith, 0 cost, generic action. Your next sword attack this turn gains +1. It has Go Again. It is a 2 block. Okay, so once again, this card is not good. The reason that I say that is I'm going to show you a card called Sharpened Steel. So Sharpened Steel blue. Your next weapon attack this turn gains +1, Go Again, and it blocks for 3 instead of blocking for 2. So it is basically the same effect except better, and also it applies to things that are not swords. So if you're playing, for instance, axes Dorinthea, you can play Sharpened Steel, and that's still going to be beneficial, whereas Visit the Blacksmith won't help you. In principle, you could put Visit the Blacksmith into a Runeblade deck, and you could, maybe if there were a Visit the Blacksmith Red, which as far as I know there is not, you could play Visit the Blacksmith Red and then swing Nebula Blade for 7. That would actually be kind of sick. 7 damage with a relevant on-hit effect. That's legitimately not bad. But as far as I know, there is no such card. I think this card only exists in a blue format because of the way that these pre-constructed decks are structured. So Visit the Blacksmith, basically a worse version of Sharpened Steel. Additionally, I believe it's only in blue. People generally do not want to play Sharpened Steel blue. I'm not saying I've never seen it, but you're much more likely to see Sharpened Steel red, and the fact that it only blocks for 2 is more of a downside on a blue than it would be on a red. So Visit the Blacksmith, again, not, I think, the finest card in the world. Probably not going to see much play. All right. Well, thus far, we've seen a lot of things that are not necessarily all that good, but... and then this one actually, one more card that is basically objectively not so good. This one is actually a warrior card, so there's not even any little upside to playing it. Your next weapon attack this turn gains +3. has Go Again. It does cost 1 though, so Sharpened Steel Red is the exact same thing, except it costs 0 instead of 1, so it's really just a lot better than On Guard. Yeah, I don't think On Guard will see very much play. I think it is... The thing is, Sharpened Steel, so there's Sharpened Steel, and then there's also Outland Skirmish, which does a very similar thing that I believe requires one-handed weapons and has an additional upside. So On Guard is kind of just a worse version of those existing cards. I do not think it's going to be used. Even if you wanted more of this effect at this point, you know, Warrior's Valor Red is going to give your next weapon attack this turn +3 and give a Go Again on hit for that same cost of 1. So On Guard is really just outclassed by other Warrior cards and is probably not something that you're going to want to use. Similarly, Nature's Path Pilgrimage is going to be 1 for +3 with upside. 1 for +3 with no upside is just not very good. And that doesn't mean it's an unplayable card in the context of the Classic Battles set, but it's not a card that you're going to want to be putting in your builds otherwise. Okay, so yeah, those cards have... So the cards that I've shown right now have basically been kind of worse versions of existing cards. Maybe with the exception of the Dawnblade, but we're now going to get to some more interesting stuff. So Hala Golden Helm, Warrior Mentor. So this is a mentor card, so you can only have it in your deck if your hero is young. And the way this works is if it's face down in Arsenal at the start of your turn, you can turn her face up, and you're then going to get this kind of passive buff, which is while Hala is face up in Arsenal, whenever a sword attack you control hits, it gains Go Again and put a lesson counter on Hala. Then if there are 2 or more lesson counters on Hala, banish her, search your deck for Glistening Steel Blade, put it face up in Arsenal, and shuffle. So this is basically going to give you an on-hit Go Again. If you are using the new Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy and Dawnblade Resplendent, scoring a hit with that first attack is going to give you Go Again and the ability to swing again, and then you're going to be able to come in for a second attack. And then once you get those lesson tokens, you can enable Glistening Steel Blade. So I personally don't think this is all that good. Most mentors do not see competitive play right now. The exception is Minerva Themis from the Bolton Blitz deck does actually see competitive play in Kasai, but I believe none of the other mentors see competitive play at present. So Hala Golden Helm I don't think is going to see that much play, but is an interesting option here for the Classic Battles deck. Does have some pretty cool looking art also. All right, and what was that card that was mentioned, the Glistening Steel Blade? Well, we're going to get to that one last. Before we do that, I want to look at Run Through. Run Through, this card actually is competitively strong. So Run Through is a yellow, it's a yellow warrior attack reaction. Target sword attack gains Go Again, and your next sword attack this turn gains +2 attack. This is actually legitimately good. So I'm going to take a look again at Bladerunner. So Bladerunner is target one-handed weapon attack gains Go Again, and your next weapon attack this turn gains +2. So Run Through compared to Bladerunner is the same sort of thing, but instead of applying to one-handed weapons, it applies to swords. So Run Through, if you're running swords, is actually the same thing as Bladerunner, and if you're running Dawnblade, which is a two-handed sword, you can use Run Through and you can't use Bladerunner. And Bladerunner has proven to be a really strong card. And Run Through, I think, is also going to be a quite strong card, and it works really well with classic Dorinthea Dawnblade decks, because a standard tactic against the old Dawnblade was if the opponent swings it and doesn't have Go Again, you just say no blocks. And then, you know, even if you don't have a defense reaction, you often just say no blocks, and if they want to play a glint and miss reprise, let them do it. Run Through is going to make that a lot more difficult, because let's say someone pitches blue, swings Dawnblade, you know, let's say someone pitches blue and swings Dawnblade, doesn't have anything else going, just has a card or two available, and you say no blocks, you know, now that person plays Run Through, target sword attack gains Go Again, your next sword attack this turn gains +2, then they use their one float on the Brave Forge Bracers, give their next attack +1, and then they pitch their other card and swing for 6, or maybe they don't spend it on the Brave Forge Bracers and they swing for 5, threatening an Iron Song response or an In the Swing to follow up. In that sort of situation, the old strategy that you would use against Dorinthea is not going to be good anymore, or it's going to be a lot riskier because that run through is giving them more options for getting the go again and continuing the turn. Similarly, you could potentially see someone using run through off of a what is that card called? Singing Steelblade. You could do a Singing Steelblade to tutor for a run through if you knew you had extra resources. Play that to give those extra stats to your next attack in the turn instead of fetching a glint. I think run through is actually going to see competitive play. I also think that decks that are already running Bladerunner might want to run through as well, replacing some of their other cards. So one example of this would be if you're playing Kasai. So I'm playing a Kasai deck right now, or I have been playing it recently in Blitz events. And that deck is running Driving Blade Red. So Driving Blade Red is a 2-cost non-attack action, and it's your next weapon attack gets +3 and go again. And if you're going to play a run through yellow instead of a Driving Blade Red, you know, it's going to cost 1 less, and it is going to have it does backload the stats. But that's kind of okay most of the time, and it costs 1 instead of 2, and it's yellow instead of red, which, you know, at least for like the Kano matchup, which is quite relevant in Blitz, that feels like a solid upgrade. So I think that run through is actually going to go into my competitive Kasai Centauri Sellsword Blitz deck pretty much immediately, and I think is going to be popular with Dorinthea players as well. So I think that this is going to be actually a strong competitive pickup for Warrior players, and fortunately the price of it is quite low. As you can see here on TCG Player, it is, here I'm going to hide Bladerunner there so it's more visible, but it is $150, not a very high price. And additionally, I believe there is a promo version of this card that is coming out in an upcoming promo kit. So a lot of these are probably going to be available, which is good for Warrior players because it is actually a strong card that they're going to want to be including. Okay, now we're going to get to probably the biggest competitive splash of any of the cards from this set, at least at first glance, and that is Glistening Steelblade. So you only get 1 copy of this in the Classic Battles box, but it is actually a legitimately really good card. So it costs 1. Dorinthea Specialization, you can only have this in your deck if your hero is Dorinthea. Your next Dawnblade attack this turn has go again. Whenever Dawnblade hits a hero this turn, put a +1 counter on it. Okay. So first off, it says Dawnblade. It doesn't say Dawnblade Resplendent. This means that you can use this with the old Dawnblade in a Dorinthea deck, even in like a classic constructed Dorinthea deck. You can use this. This card is really, really, really good. It's difficult to describe how good this card is for Dorinthea's game plan. So first off, so it costs 1 and gives your next Dawnblade attack this turn go again. That's already something that is like kind of nice. The fact that it costs 1, you know, you might say, oh, but I can just play hit and run and that costs 0 and gives me go again. Well, okay. But it also gives you this on hit effect. Whenever Dawnblade hits a hero this turn, put a +1 counter on it. And the crazy thing about this is the +1 counter that you get from that actually can stay. So with Glistening, with the old Dawnblade, if you hit someone with Glistening Steelblade, you know, you're going to get that +1 counter, and that's going to stay until the next turn because you hit them, you know, you hit them with Dawnblade this turn, and potentially that's going to make you much harder to deal with in the future. You know, if you hit them with both of your attacks, you actually get 3 +1 counters, 2 from Glistening Steelblade and 1 from Dawnblade's ability, and then you're going into the next turn, you know, and you're going to be able to spend 1 to swing for 6, which is crazy. So Glistening Steelblade is a really threatening on-hit effect. I think it's going to make people block against it. And the really crazy thing about it, though, is if you're playing with the new Dawnblade, the Dawnblade Resplendent, and the +1 counter that you can get from Glistening Steelblade is legitimately permanent. There's no way for it to be removed. Okay, so in principle, you could play another card that gives you +1 counters, but you lose them at the end of the turn. I think, what's it called? I think it's like Oath of Steel or something does that. But assuming that you don't do something to lose those +1 counters, the new Dawnblade doesn't have a mechanism for losing these counters. So if you were to hit someone twice with Glistening Steelblade, all of a sudden your base strength is 4 and your second attack in a turn is 5 for the rest of the game. That is really, really, really strong. In fact, it's so strong that I actually think there may be some reason to play Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy and Dawnblade Resplendent in like actual competitive play. I don't think it will be worth it because you're really leaning on your 2 copies of Glistening Steelblade in your deck to be getting you value for the whole game. I don't think it's going to be worth it to do that, but it's really strong. The idea of the idea of being able to get this, the idea of being able to get a permanent +1 counter is a very, very powerful thing to do in Flesh and Blood. Dawnblade is already a high block priority just because of the prospect of getting a +1 counter that can potentially even be knocked off later. It's still considered very risky to let a Dorinthea opponent get their Dawnblade counter. And that's not to say you never do it. Sometimes you're in a situation where it actually is the right thing to do, but a lot of the time you do not want to be giving Dory a Dawnblade counter. And this is even crazier because potentially they could get 2 in a turn from this card. And if they're using the new Dawnblade, they're permanent. So this card is extremely strong. I think that actually, I suspect this is a max copies auto include for all Dorinthea decks. I could be wrong. The other thing about it is it's actually not red, it's yellow. So Spoils of War, which is another card that costs 1 and gives you Go Again and gives you an on-hit effect, in that case giving you 2 copper. Spoils of War is a red. Now to be fair, Spoils of War also gives the next attack +2. But Glistening Steelblade is a much more threatening on-hit effect than Spoils of War, and it does actually come on a yellow card as well, which is pretty wild. So I think this is going to be really commonly seen in competitive play, and unfortunately that is reflected in its price. Because right now, if you want to buy this as a single, it looks like it costs $27, which is, I believe, more than half the cost of the actual box just for this one card. I have to admit, I'm a little confused as to why they did that this way. Most of the cards in this box are not competitively very good. I'm not saying that to insult LSS. I think it's intentional. Like I think they were printing simplified versions of cards that would be more straightforward for new players. But Glistening Steelblade is really, really strong. And it is competitively really, really strong. And I think it's basically, if you're a competitive Flesh and Blood player, I'm not an expert on Brute. Some of the Brute cards might be things that you would want to see in a, some of the Brute cards might be things that you would want to see in a constructed deck. But as a Warrior player, Run Through is a good card. Run Through is a card that I'm going to be putting into the deck, but it's also going to be available relatively cheaply and available as a promo outside of this this specific box. Glistening Steelblade is a really, really good card. And the only way to get it right now is in this Classic Battles box. So I think you might see some players who are really dedicated to Warrior actually buying the box just for this one card. And we'll see how things develop. Maybe this price of $27 is going to, maybe that price is going to decrease over time. It's certainly possible, but this is right now really the star card of the box for a Warrior player. And it is the main competitive reason to pick the box up, in my opinion. The prospect of giving you that like extra +1 counters on hit with the new Dawnblade, with the old Dawnblade, or permanent +1 counters on hit with the new Dawnblade, that is just so dangerous, and it makes this a really powerful effect to have available. I do think it's going to be very commonly seen in Dorinthea decks, and the only difficulty is it is going to be kind of annoying to get, because either you have to buy the Classic Battles box for this card only, or you're going to have to buy it as an expensive single. We'll see what happens. Some people have said, maybe this is actually going to be printed in a future set as a normal card. That may be. We'll see what happens with that. I certainly hope there is something that makes it a little more available, simply because this is a box that's kind of oriented towards newer players, and I think it's going to be pretty annoying if like competitive Warrior players buy up the supply of this new player box so that they can get their hands on the 1x Glistening Steelblade or whatever. That does seem like an odd thing. But we'll have to see what happens with that. It certainly is a cool card, and I suspect that it will see some competitive play. in the future for Dorinthea in both Blitz and Classic Constructed. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens. All right, guys, I think that's basically the review over and done with, more or less. I think those were all the novel cards in this set. I'll probably be uploading this to YouTube later on, but yeah, so that's my take on the Classic Battles product, at least from a kind of more competitive Warrior standpoint. And I will say, this product is not aimed towards competitive players mostly. I mean, this Glistening Steelblade is definitely something that's appealing to them, as is Run Through, but most of the set is oriented towards newer players, I think, and has cards that are included in order to be... I think you would say that it has cards that are included in order to be simple and easy to learn. And so you see things like the card Thrust. If you compare that to Razor Reflex, Thrust is worse than Razor Reflex because it's basically the same thing but lacks some of these other options. But because those other options aren't actually relevant to the new player experience, I don't think it's crazy to print a card in a new player set that lacks some of those other things just for simplicity. Like, if you had put Razor Reflex into the set instead of Thrust, you know, you can imagine a situation where someone's like, well, this applies to daggers, but I don't have a dagger. What is that? Or like, does my deck even have any attacks to use this with? And I believe the answer is no. So it makes sense, I think, for them to print cards that are simpler to help the new player experience. And that is a lot of what is contained in this set. But there are those few cards that are going to be kind of the diamonds in the rough for the competitive player. And I think specifically Run Through and Glistening Steelblade are going to be the ones that are going to be most appealing to Warrior players. I do think there's also a chance that we will actually see people playing. I do think there is a chance that we will see people playing Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy and Dawnblade Resplendent as a deck, largely on the strength of Glistening Steelblade potentially buffing your attacks permanently, but I am not sure that that will end up being competitive relative to old Dorinthea or Kasai. However, Glistening Steelblade and Run Through I do think are going to see a fair amount of competitive usage. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this video. If anyone has any questions or comments in the chat, feel free to send those in. I will be closing things down shortly. Otherwise, though, it's been